Hello dear children. Today we are going to do chapter number 10 of your civics subject. The name of the topic is Law and Social Justice. Law means the system of rules which a particular country recognizes. Do you recall the story of a shirt from your class 7 book? Was in your last year's civics book in chapter number 9. You have learned a shirt in the market. The chapter tells us the story of a shirt. It begins with the production of cotton and ends with the sale of the shirt. So it was based on that. We show there that a chain of markets links the producer of cotton to the buyer of the shirt in the supermarket. Right from that means uh, getting cotton from plants up to the buyer of the shirt in the supermarket. There is a chain maintained. Buying and selling was taking place at every step in the chain. So in the chapter was buying and selling, it was taking place at every step in the chain. Many of the people directly or indirectly involved in the production of the shirt, the small farmer producing cotton, the weavers of erode or the workers in the garment exporting factory face exploitation or an unfair situation in the market. So in this transaction we find many of the people directly or indirectly they involved in the production of the shirt. The small farmer they used to produce cotton, then the weavers of erode or the workers in the garment exporting factory, then face exploitation. Exploitation means treating someone unfairly or on unfair situation in the market. Markets everywhere tend to be exploitative of people, whether as workers, consumers, or producers. Here, markets everywhere tend means regularly or frequently behave in a particular way to be exploitative of people. Exploitative means making use of a situation or treating others unfairly. Exploitative of people, whether as workers, consumers, or producers. Workers, those who are working there, consumers who are using that, and producers means those who are producing it. To protect people from such exploitation, the government makes certain laws. These laws try to ensure that the unfair practices are kept at a minimum in the markets. So, in order to protect people from this type of exploitation, our government they make certain laws. They make certain laws here, certain rules they made. These laws try to ensure that the unfair practices are kept at a minimum in the markets. And these laws, it always try that such type of unfair practices are minimized in the market. Let us take a common market situation where the law is very important. This is the issue of workers, wages, private companies, contractors, business persons normally want to make as much profit as they can. Here, as an example, let us take a common market situation where the law is very important. This is the issue of workers, wages, private companies, contractors, business persons normally want to make as much profit as they can. Here, this is the issue of the workers, those who are working here, their salaries, wages means salaries here. Private companies, contractors, business persons, they normally want to make as much profit as they can. So they are also trying to get profit as much they can. In the drive for profits, they might deny workers their rights and not pay them wages, for example. So in order to get more profit, they might deny them. Deny means might refuses workers their rights and not pay them wages. There that means salaries, for example. In the eyes of the law, it is illegal or wrong to deny workers their wages. So in front of the laws, see, it is illegal if anyone employs any person without giving proper wages to that worker, that is also illegal. Similarly, to ensure that workers are not underpaid or are paid fairly, there is a law on minimum wages. So in the same way, to check that workers are not underpaid, they are not paid, that means less salaries, underpaid means that one, or are paid fairly, there is a law on minimum wages. It's a law that means for this minimum wages. A worker has to be paid not less than the minimum wage by the employer. Worker has to be given not less than the minimum wage by the employer. The minimum wages are revised upwards every few years. So minimum wages is set by the government. It used to revise upwards every few years according to the market value. It used to revise. As with the law on minimum wages, which is meant to protect workers, there are also laws that protect the interests of producers and consumers in the market. As with the law on minimum wages, which is meant to protect workers, there are also laws that protect the interest of producers, those who are producing that, and consumers in the market. So both ways, that means laws are there. These help ensure that the relations between these three parties, the worker, consumer, and producer, are governed in a manner that is not exploitative. So here, this helps ensure that the relations between these three parties, here the worker, consumer, and the producer, are governed in a manner that is not discrimination or treating others unfairly. But merely making laws is not enough. The government has to ensure that these laws are implemented. But merely means entirely making laws is not enough here. The government has ensured that the government make sure that these laws are implemented, these laws are utilized. This means that the law must be enforced. Enforcement becomes even more important when the law seeks to protect the weak from the strong. So enforcement it becomes even more important here when the law seeks here to protect the weak from the strong, the poor from the rich. For example, to ensure that every worker gets fair wages, the government has to regularly inspect work sites and punish those who violate the law. Here, as example, to ensure that every worker gets fair wages, to be sure that every worker they are getting their salary in proper way, the government has to regularly inspect. So government need to keep their vision towards that, inspect work sites, and if they find anyone that means who is not following the rules or the laws, they have to punish them. When workers are poor or powerless, the fear of losing future earnings or facing reprisals often forces them to accept low wages. So thing that means it is persisted in our India also. Okay, they are afraid of jobless among the people. So when workers are poor or powerless, they have afraid of losing their future earnings or facing reprisals. It often forces them to accept low wages. So in order to that means when they are joining any work, because of their poorness, they used to remain silent. Employers know this well and use their power to pay workers less than the fair wage. Employers who have employed the workers, they know it very clearly, and as they know it, so they use their power to pay workers less than what they have to get. In such cases, it is crucial that laws are enforced. So, in such condition, it is crucial here that laws are compel observance. Through making, enforcing, and upholding these laws, the government can control the activities of individuals or private companies so as to ensure social justice. So, by making this or enforcing and upholding means confirming or supporting these laws, the government can control the activities of individuals or private companies so as to ensure social justice. Many of these laws have their basis in the fundamental rights granted by the Indian Constitution. But you have learned about these fundamental rights which is granted to us by our Indian Constitution. So many of these laws have been their basis in the fundamental rights. For instance, the right against exploitation says that no one can be forced to work for low wages or under bondage. Uh, Here, as example, we can say the right against exploitation. It is one of our fundamental rights. It says that no one can force anybody to do work for low wages or under bondage. Bondage means the state of being a slave. Similarly, the Constitution lays down no child below the age of 14 years shall be employed to work in any factory or mines or engaged in any other hazardous employment. In the same way, the Constitution it also lays down that no child whose age is below 14 years shall be employed to work in any factory or mines or engaged in any other hazardous employment means those whose age is less than 14 at any cost they are not allowed to join any work or employed in any factory or mines or engaged in any other hazardous employment. Hazardous means full of risks employment. How are these laws played out in practice? To what extent do they address the concerns of social justice? These are some of the questions that this chapter will now go on to the explore. Here we are going to learn about these points. That is, how are these laws played out in practice? To what extent do they address the concerns of social justice? We are going to discuss about this. Have a look here, boys. That means in page number 123, the last part you can see here according to the 2011 census. Okay, you read out this one. Okay, Bhopal gas tragedy. A tragedy which took place in Bhopal. Now let us see that. The world's worst industrial tragedy took place in Bhopal 24 years ago. So it is one of the world's worst industrial tragedy which took place in Bhopal of our India. Okay, 24 years ago. Union Carbide, an American company, had a factory in the city in which it produced pesticides. So Union Carbide, it is an American company. It had a factory in the city of Bhopal. There, it produced pesticides. Pesticides means, boys, this is a chemical which is used to spread on crops in order to protect our crops from pests, germs, insects like that. At midnight on 2nd December 1984, methyl isocyanate, a highly poisonous gas, started leaking from this UC plant. So on 2nd December 1984, okay, this MIC, it is a highly poisonous gas. It started leaking from this UC plant. Remembers Aziza Sultan, a survivor. At about 12:30 a.m., I woke to the sound of my baby coughing badly. In the half light, I saw that the room was filled with a white cloud. I heard people shouting, "Run, run!" Then I started coughing with each breath, seeming as if I was breathing in fire. My eyes were burning. So, see what happened to her when that poisonous gas leaches there. So, what reaction she felt there, it has clear here. Within 3 days, more than 8,000 people were dead. Hundreds of thousands were maimed. Most of those exposed to the poison gas came from poor working class families, of which nearly 50,000 people are today too sick to work. Among those who survived, many developed severe respiratory disorders, eye problems, and other disorders. Children developed peculiar abnormalities like the girl in the photo. So here you can see in the photo also the abnormality of the girl. So in that tragedy, most of those exposed to the poisonous poison gas came from poor working class families. This belongs to most of the poor working families, of which nearly 50,000 people are today too sick to work, yet they are not fit to work. Among those who survived, many developed severe respiratory disorders. They have breathing problems till today. Eye problems, some of them they have eye problems and others disorders. Children developed peculiar abnormalities, means cannot work nicely or hold anything nicely, like the girl in the photo. The disaster was not an accident. UC had deliberately ignored the essential safety measures in order to cut costs. Much before the Bhopal disaster, there had been incidents of gas leak killing a worker and injuring several. Despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to UC as responsible for the disaster, it refused to accept responsibility. See, though uh, people they pointed out about that means the responsibility of this UC plant, but UC plant they refused to accept their responsibility. In the ensuing in the ensuing legal battle, the government represented the victims in a civil case against UC. It filed a $1 billion compensation case in 1985 but accepted a lowly, that is $470 million in 1989. Survivors appealed against the settlement, but the Supreme Court ruled that the settlement amount would stand. UC stopped its operations but left behind tons of toxic chemicals. These have seeped into the ground, contaminating water. Dow Chemical, the company who now owns the plant, refuses to take responsibility for cleanup. See what a condition, what a awful condition made by this UC plant here. 24 years later, people are still fighting for justice, for safe drinking water, for health care facilities, and jobs for the people poisoned by UC. They also demand that Anderson, the UC chairman, who faces criminal charges be prosecuted. So this is the acts of the people. 20 after 24 years later, you see, people are they are still fighting for the justice. They won't get justice till today. They were asking for safe drinking water, for health care facilities, and job for the people poisoned by this UC plant. They also demand that Anderson, he was the UC chairman, who faces criminal charges, be prosecuted. Means he should be under the laws, or law should be punished him. What is a worker's worth? If we are to understand the events leading to Bhopal disaster, we have to ask, why did Union Carbide set up its plant in India? So, here was, if we are to understand the events leading to Bhopal disaster, the tragedy which made, here we have to ask, why did this Union Carbide set up its plant in our India? One reason why foreign companies come to India is for cheap labor. See, they can set up this plant there in their own country, in America, but why they like to establish their companies here is because of in our India here cheap labor are available. Boys mark this, why they establish these foreign companies in India. Wages that the companies pay to workers, say in the USA, are far higher than what they have to pay to workers in poorer countries like India. Okay, wages means that salaries that companies they pay to the workers in USA are far higher. Their salary is higher than what they have to pay to workers in poorer countries like our India. For lower pay, companies can get longer hours of work, and for this lower pay, companies can get longer hours of work. Additional expenses such as for housing, facilities for workers are also fewer. Means extra expenditure also they need not bear, such as housing facilities for workers. Thus, companies can save costs and earn higher profits. So that's why they are playing their monopoly here in order to establish companies. Okay, here in our country, companies can save costs and they can earn more profit here. So this is their target why they used to establish companies in our country. Cost cutting can also be done by other more dangerous means. Lower working conditions, including lower safety measures, are used as ways of cutting costs. In the UC plant, every safety device was malfunctioning or was in short supply. They are not, that means, in a proper way. Between 1980 and 1984, the work crew for the MIC plant was cut in half from 12 to 6 hours. The period of safety training for workers was brought down from 6 months to 15 days. The post of night shift worker for the MIC plant was abolished. So such thing have not done here. Then, though it has done, you see what happened now. Let us see read the following comparison between UC safety system in Bhopal and its other plant in the USA. Let us compare it. At West Virginia in USA, okay, computerized warning and monitoring system were in place, whereas the UC plant in Bhopal relied on manual gauges and the human senses to detect gas leaks. See the difference here. At the West Virginia plant, emergency evacuation plans were in place, but non-existent in Bhopal. Why are there such sharp differences in safety standards across countries? And even after the disaster happened, why was the compensation to the victims so low? See why that means are there such differences up. We find sharp differences are there in safety standards across countries. And even after the disasters or tragedy happened, why was the compensation amount, whatever happened to need to give to the victims, so low? Why it is so? One part of the answer lies in what is perceived as the worth of an Indian worker. So one part of the answer it lies in what is perceived means become aware as the worth of an Indian worker. One worker can easily replace another. Since there is so much unemployment, there are many workers who are willing to work in unsafe conditions in return for a wage. Here, since there is so much unemployment, people not that means they are not getting any job. There are many workers who are willing to work in unsafe conditions in return for a wage. Making use of the workers' vulnerability, employers ignore safety in workplaces. So, making use of workers' vulnerability means the quality of state of being exposed to the attack or harm. Employers ignore safety in workplaces. That even so, thus even so many years after the Bhopal gas tragedy, there are regular reports of accidents in construction sites, mines, or factories due to the callous attitude of the employers. Here, what happened? See, Bhopal gas tragedy took place so many years back, but there are regular reports of this accident in construction sites, mines, or factories due to the callous attitude of the employers. Here, it is because of that this is happening. Enforcement of safety laws, safety in order to save life, enforcement or utilization of proper laws. Let us see. As a lawmaker and enforcer, the government is supposed to ensure that safety laws are implemented. It is also the duty of the government to ensure that the right to life granted under Article 21 of the Constitution is not violated. Boys, you mark this Article 21. Okay, right to life granted by our Constitution under Article 21. You must know it here as the lawmaker and to enforce it. The government here is supposed to ensure or to be sure that if the safety laws are implemented, safety laws are utilized. It is also the duty of the government to ensure that the right to life granted under Article 21 of the Constitution is not violated. So these articles should not be violated or affected. What was the government doing when there were such blatant violations of safety standards in the UC plant? Blatant means was done openly or unashamedly. So what was the government doing at that time? It talks here. First, the safety laws were lax in India. Second, even this week, safety laws were not enforced. Okay, so these are the hindrances, and as a result of this, such thing happened. Government officials refused to recognize the plant as hazardous and allowed it to come up in a populated locality. Government officials, they used to refuse what to recognize the plant as dangerous for health, and without looking that they allowed it to come up in a populated locality. There's areas where population is high. When some municipal officials in Bhopal objected that the installation of the MIC production unit in 1978 was a safety violation, the position of the government was that the state need the continued investment of the Bhopal plant, which provides jobs. It was unthinkable, according to them, to us, you see, to shift to cleaner technology or safer procedures. Government inspectors continue to approve the procedures in the plant even when repeated incidents of leaks from the plant made it obvious to everybody that things were seriously wrong. Seriously wrong here. This, as you know, is contrary to what the role of a lawmaking and enforcement agency should be. Instead of protecting the interests of the people, their safety was being disregarded both by the government and by private companies. You see, here in place of protecting the interest of the people, their safety was not regarded by both by government as well as private companies. This is obviously not at all desirable. With more industries being set up both by local and foreign business in India, there is a great need for stronger laws protecting workers' right and better enforcement of these laws. Enforcement means compliance with the law. Here it is very much needed for us. Proper laws should be there in order to protect our workers' rights. Boys, towards your right margin, you can see some questions you have to work out, and many questions answered. I have already sent you. So for your exam, you have to learn all those questions answered. Now let us continue. Next page. New laws to protect the environment. In order to protect our environment, new laws has been established. Let us see. In 1984, there were very few laws protecting the environment in India, and there was hardly any enforcement of these laws. The environment was treated as a free entity, and any industry could pollute the air and water without any restrictions. Whether it was our rivers, air, groundwater, the environment was being polluted and people disregarded. So, see, it was not in the proper supervision. Okay, health, regarding health matter, it was not looked properly. So, in the year 1984, there were very few laws at the time protecting the environment in our India, and there was hardly any enforcement of these laws. Though it may be there these laws, but it was not in proper way utilized. The environment was treated as a free entity, and any industry could pollute the air and water without any restrictions. So there was no any restrictions regarding that. Whether it was our rivers, air, groundwater, okay, like that. Thus, not only was UC a beneficiary of lower waste safety standards, it didn't have to spend any money to clean up the pollution. In the USA, this is a necessary part of the production process. The Bhopal disaster brought the issue of environment to the forefront. Forefront means leading. Okay. Several thousands of persons who were not associated with the factory in any way were greatly affected because of the poisonous gases leaked from the plant. You see, many are there who are not working there, but they were also greatly affected by this poisonous gas which leaked from the plant. This made people realize that the existing laws, though weak, only covered the individual worker and not persons who might be injured due to industrial accidents. See, here this made people realize, this make people to understand that the existing of these laws, though weak, it only covered the individual worker, only covered the individual worker and not those persons who might be injured due to industrial accidents. In response to this pressure from environmental activists and others in the years following the Bhopal gas tragedy, the Indian government introduced new laws on the environment. So, to respond to this pressure from environmental activists and others in the years following, means after that the Bhopal gas tragedy happened, the Indian government introduced new laws on the environment. Henceforth, the polluter was to be held accountable for the damage done to environment. The environment is something that people over generations will share, and it could not be destroyed merely for industrial development. So environment, it has to be shared by everyone, and it is the duty of every individual to keep it clean and safe, and it could not be destroyed merely just to set up industries or to develop industries. The court also gave a number of judgments upholding the right to a healthy environment as intrinsic to the fundamental right to life. In Subhash Kumar versus State of Bihar 1991, the Supreme Court held that the right to life is a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Constitution, and it includes the right to the enjoyment of pollution-free water and air for full enjoyment of life. right. Okay, that is Article 21, the Constitution, and it includes the right to the enjoyment of pollution-free water and air for full enjoyment of life. The government is responsible for setting up laws and procedures that can check pollution, clean rivers, and introduce heavy fines for those who pollute. So it is the responsible of our government in order to set up laws and making procedures which can check pollution, clean rivers, and introduce heavy fines those who are committing such crime to pollute the environment. Here was page 1 to 9, environment is a public facility. You just get through this one. Now let us proceed to conclusion of the chapter. Laws are necessary in many situations, whether this be the market, office or factory, so as to protect people from unfair practices. Laws it is necessary in many situations, in many conditions, whether this be in the market, office or factory, so as to protect people from unfair practices. Private companies, contractors, business persons, in order to make higher profits, resort to unfair practices such as paying workers low wages, employing children for work, ignoring the conditions of work, ignoring the damage to the environment and hence to the people in the neighborhood, etc. So laws these are necessary in such conditions. A major role of the government, therefore, is to control the activities of private companies by making, enforcing, and upholding laws so as to prevent unfair practices and ensure social justice. So, in order to get uh, social justice by the people, so it is a major role of the government to control the activities of private companies by making, utilizing, or upholding laws so as to prevent or protect from unfair practices and ensure our social justice. This means that the government has to make appropriate laws and also has to enforce the laws. It means here the government has to make correct laws and also has to utilize that laws. Laws that are weak and poorly enforced can cause serious harm, as the Bhopal gas tragedy showed. So laws, if the laws are weak and enforced poorly, then it can cause serious damages to our life. As example of this Bhopal gas tragedy we saw here. While the government has a leading role in this respect, people can exert pressure so that both private companies and the government act in the interest of society. The government has a leading role here. They have the main role in this respect. People can exert pressure. So we the people we can pressurize our government so that both private companies and the government act in the interest of the society. Society should not be harmed or affected in such a way. Okay, we the people we can ask to the government. Environment, as we show, is one example where people have pushed a public cause and the courts have upheld the right of healthy environment as intrinsic. Intrinsic means essential words. intrinsic to the right to life. In this chapter, we have argued that people now must demand that this facility of healthy environment be extended to all. Here in this chapter, talks what that people now they must demand that this facility of healthy environment should be extended to every person. Likewise, workers' rights, that is right to work, right to a fair wage and decent work conditions is an area where the situation is still very unfair. Okay, this picture you see the unfairness of people are utilizing in different work. It is persistent till today. People must demand stronger laws protecting workers' interests so that the right to life is achieved for all. So people they must demand stronger laws should be there in order to protect workers' interest so that the right to life can achieve by every